So it's been pretty obvious that Pixar has not been keeping a good track record lately. I thought that Soul was a pretty great movie, and Luca, while not doing anything amazing, had charming characters and a refreshingly small-scaled story. I enjoyed those two movies, but obviously when 2022 rolled around, everything just went downhill for Pixar. Turning Red had some fans, but it was also very trashed all over the internet. I appreciated the passion behind the project, but I just didn't connect with the story or these characters, mainly because this movie isn't really targeted for me. The second film that Pixar released last year was Lightyear, which got really mixed and negative reviews, and yeah, I really didn't like the movie. It was bland and forgettable. It didn't have any of the Pixar charm. It just felt like a cheap cash grab, except it flopped at the box office and lost money for Disney, so it didn't even work financially for Pixar. And of course, both of these films got absolutely embarrassed and overshadowed by DreamWorks' Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which dominated the animation space both critically and at the box office. Anyways, to get to the point, things were not going in Pixar's favor this past year, and everyone was looking at their next upcoming film to see if it could at least prove that Pixar can still make great movies. And that next movie was Pixar's Elemental. Now, going into this film, I was more optimistic than I really should have been. The trailers didn't look too great, all the buzz was at an all-time low, the first reviews were okay, I guess. But I don't know, I just had a bit of hope that this movie could bring us back to the glory days of Pixar with actual original stories and characters. So what did I think about it? It wasn't that good, I'm sorry. It's like, okay, it's fine, I guess. I mean, if this was made by some random animation studio, I would have been like, okay, whatever, and just forgot about it. But since this is Pixar, one of the most influential, praised, and consistent film studios of all time, I was really disappointed and bummed out by this. Even if this wasn't made by Pixar, I still would not like this movie very much. I don't know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad or anything, I just found this movie to be very forgettable and the story to be incredibly bland. I do think that it's a tiny step up from the two Pixar films from last year. I think this movie felt a little bit less corporate and had more passion, despite me not really liking it that much. Let's start with the things that I liked about it. First off, I found the animation to be pretty good. I liked the character design and animation for the fire people, that was pretty cool. Some of the textures and designs made this world more immersive to me. A big problem that I had with Lightyear was that the animation was so boring since the sets and backgrounds were just so stale and there was like no color. Everything looked bland, but this movie actually looked really colorful. I also enjoyed the world building. There are some pretty clever and creative concepts that they add into this element city to make it seem like it's an actual place where elements live. Lots of people have been raving about the score, and while I didn't remember much from it, I'm sure I'll appreciate it more after a second viewing. Also, occasionally, you do feel some of the Pixar magic in some moments of the film. Like, okay, spoilers if you care, but the scene where Ember and Wade touch for the first time was pretty cool, and when Ember's dad says that his dream was never about the shop, but it was always about Ember, that was a nice moment too. The plot line with Ember working with her dad running this little fire shop business was pretty sweet and charming. I liked it. Alright, that's now basically all the major things that I liked about the film. Now we have to go into the stuff that I didn't like. First off, like I said, I found the story to be incredibly predictable and generic. This is your standard Romeo and Juliet story where there's two separate clans who don't like each other, and then one person from each group goes out and falls in love with the other person and proves that the two clans can make peace with each other. So yeah, the main storyline is pretty generic. I'm not gonna go too deep into this, but I think that the metaphor with like the 4 different elements and how that ties into the real world social issues with racism and discrimination, I didn't think it was handled very well, even though I know that Pixar had good intentions. Anyways, back to the story. The romance between Wade and Ember was like not developed very well at all. They don't really have much chemistry with each other, and you don't really feel any romantic tension between the two. I felt like it would have been perfectly fine for them to just be good friends. There's a whole montage of them going into Element City and doing fun stuff together and bonding, and that would have been better at developing their friendship other than forcing their romantic relationship. They had some good moments, especially when they start expressing how much they like each other, but throughout the majority of the movie, I wasn't really buying into their relationship. It just felt very forced. Also, I was not a fan of the third act or the climax at all. It was very underwhelming, and the choices that the characters make were so uncalled for and out of character. Again, another spoiler segment, I guess, if you care. So Ember and Wade have their emotional hand-touching scene, but then Wade says the same line that Ember's dad says to her. I think the line was like, I am so lucky to have you, or something. I forgot. And then Ember remembers that she needs to take over the shop and can't be with Wade. So then she just randomly loses her temper in front of him and says she can't be with him, which was like very uncalled for. And then Wade also loses his temper and says that Ember's just afraid, and they both start yelling at each other. So Ember leaves and goes to the party where her dad will be officially giving the shop to her, but then Wade just becomes a total dick and crashes the party and confronts Ember in front of everyone, and he confesses his love, but then Ember rejects him. But oh no, Ember's dad hears this and yells at Ember, and now she's no longer getting the shop and everyone is sad now. I'm sorry, these are just some stupid plot conveniences and it gets super annoying. I'm getting really tired of these third act breakups in these animated movies. Then in the climax, there's this massive flood headed into Firetown, but Wade saves Ember by barricading her in a small room, but oh no, Ember's heat is evaporating him, even though that was never explained before. But he actually survives because of course he's not gonna die. This is made by Disney. Even though the logic for how he survives is never explained. But it doesn't matter since Ember and Wade kiss and everything is good now. I felt like this was just a very forced and disappointing climax. The whole bridge collapsing plotline was already finished and it felt so weird to bring it back. Like maybe for the climax the Firetown people would like hold a protest or something against all the water people, and they would have this big fight, and then Ember and Wade will have to prove to everyone that elements can be mixed and stuff. That would make the other elements have an actual role in the climax. I don't know, that would be more exciting. Speaking of other elements, the wind and earth elements don't do anything in the story. They only exist to have gags and jokes about how they function. It would have been nice if they included a character from each of the wind and earth elements that wanted to help Ember and Wade. I don't know, the wind and earth elements just felt so useless in this movie. I also found myself being bored for some parts of the movie. I wish that they could have used a tighter script. And as for the humor in this movie, it didn't work for me. There are some good jokes, I guess, but I didn't find myself laughing throughout the majority of the movie. There are some very unfunny and corny puns and jokes that they make referring to like elements, since it is a movie about elements. Anyways, I have no idea how I managed to talk about this movie for this long. Elemental is fine, I guess. It had good animation, good world building, and you can feel some of that Pixar spark in some moments. You can tell that there was at least some passion behind this project, and I guess it was better than Lightyear, and I enjoyed it more than Turning Red, but it's still not up to that Pixar standard that we have all expected these films to live up to, quality-wise. This movie is forgettable, and didn't really leave any impact on me. The story is insanely predictable and forced. There are so many plot conveniences. The characters were at points very unlikable, and the third act with the climax was so underwhelming. The main romance didn't feel well developed, and the metaphors to real-world racisms weren't handled very well. and I'm just not going to remember much about this film. I really did want to like this movie a lot, and if you do enjoy this movie, I'm happy for you. I can at least see why some people would like this movie, but it just didn't work for me. I want Pixar to succeed, and I guess this is a step in the right direction since they're working on more original stories and they're being more creative. I somewhat enjoyed this movie watching it in theaters, but the more I think about it, the more I dislike it. I'm torn on whether to give it a 6 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10, so I'll just go in the middle and give Elemental a 5.5 out of 10.